Hello everyone, my name is Levent Gurdemir, UTA Planetarium Director and UTA Astronomer. Today we are going to talk about telescopes and perhaps you are buying one. We got a lot of questions about telescopes and usually they ask me which one I would recommend buying one. So it is not an easy question to answer because it depends on a lot of things. So we just wanted to give you some information and maybe you can make the decision on your own. So the first question is always, of course, the purpose. So what you are aiming to do in the night sky with your telescope. So if it's going to be maybe a gift to a kid or to someone grown up, that's a different story. And if you are going to just start your own astrophotography hobby, that's a different story. And of course, the budgets are different. The telescopes you need to use are different. But let's start from the basics. So the basic of a telescope, and those are the most inexpensive category, are the refractors. So telescopes come in different categories. For example, a refracting telescope, from the word, you can imagine like the telescope with lenses. Pretty much like a pair of binoculars, for example. They use lenses to show you things, they magnify for you the things. And this is the most basic telescope which was actually used by Galileo, and for the 400 years that telescopes are serving for the purpose. For example, there is one refracting telescope. When we say refracting telescope, let me go near the telescope and show you some of the components. For example, refracting telescope has a great lens in front of it. So this is the most expensive part. Making a lens is not inexpensive. It requires a lot of engineering and technology. So the lens is the most expensive part of a telescope. So you need to invest most of your money in for the lens. And a good quality lens comes with its price. So, and there is another lens, a secondary lens, inside of the telescope. And here is the piece that you are looking at. And this is most inexpensive telescope this category is, and also this is probably the most simple use telescope because all you need to do is just your binocular. Just set your telescope on the ground and point your telescope to an object in the sky, and from the eyepiece point just look in the sky to see your object. So it is pretty easy.
What happens if you were to look at, say, the moon through the other way? What if you look through the big part?
Well, first thing, I need to remind you that there's one thing you never look at it with a telescope, and that is the sun. So you never look at the sun using any optical device, including sunglasses. So because sun can burn an eye in just a second. But this type of telescope could be a good telescope to start with, to practice, because especially during the first quarter through the full moon, the moon is earlier in the sky right after sunset. You can just practice it on your own, because you will find, if you are the first time telescope owner, you will find out that pointing a telescope is not an easy task, especially if you are pointing to a star or planet. It may take several minutes. So you can use just a bright moon because it's easier to point. So you can just practice your telescope. All right, so those are the most inexpensive type telescope. It doesn't mean that those are the most inexpensive to manufacture, because a good quality telescope still can run over $1,000 on this. But you can probably find a good one for a couple $100. And I wouldn't actually set my budget anything lower than 100 and maybe 150 if you wish, because the cheaper the telescope, the more disappointment you would get. The cheaper telescope will get lightweight It will have lightweight tripod, lightweight construction, cheap plastic lenses, and your image will not be perfect. But a good quality telescope will feature glass lens, especially high technology engineering lens, and the good solid structure like this one, and a good tripod. So you can set your budget up accordingly.
So, question we got from in the Ask the Astronomer page on our website. That goes for everybody. If you want to ask us questions, you can drop them in the Facebook chat. But if you want to ask us questions for future episodes, feel free to use the Ask an Astronomer link, which is in the comments below. But we got a question that was about where do I buy a telescope if I want to go somewhere and buy it in person in the DFW area?
Well, unfortunately, most of the telescope shops across the United States closed their shops because that wasn't a sustainable business. They don't sell telescopes every day, so they couldn't keep up, so they closed the stores. And that leaves the only places to buy telescopes are online shops. So you need to do your online search, search for telescope, just for the word. You will come across to a lot of websites with a lot of information, and try to find a good telescope vendors or telescope outlets with good reviews, because what you are looking at most of the time is your return policy, and if your telescope arrives broken, for example, how you can just return it what they cover. So you need to find out those things. But pretty much internet is your only shopping place for the one. And this is true for the DFW area. The last telescope store I know of closed their doors about 5-6 years ago. So they are gone out of business.
What about the telescopes I see at Walmart?
Well, yeah, but sometimes I see good telescopes too. It depends. But most of the time, the big stores, they sell kits of telescopes. Of course, buying kits, it sounds like a better idea. But the problem with those kits are, usually they put the cheapest possible telescope in the kits and decorate it with a lot of accessories. But you would like to do the opposite way, because you would like to spend most of your money for the telescope optics itself and less money on the kits. Because this is going to be the one your money goes into that, into the quality. And I would like to stay away from any electronics with the small grade telescopes, because those electronics are costing a lot of money and doesn't work because most has like plastic gears and very cheap electronics. So stay away from electronics, and especially like computer controlled telescopes. If you are paying a couple $100, you won't get a good one. So what I'm holding is a different category of telescopes. This telescope, this particular model is called Newtonian. And let me answer this question. Which way do we look for alignment of the planets this weekend? By the way, hi Braxton, thank you sir for joining in for the second or for the many time over here. So for the planet alignments, so all the three planets nowadays are making an interesting group to each other. Those are Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury, but they are too low in the sky. So they are not going to be visible if you have like a flat horizon during sunset. So they are too close to the horizon, so you won't be able to see it probably from DFW location. But west direction is going to be the best direction to see that alignment. Okay, so let's go back to Newtonian telescopes. This telescope was invented by Newton. So this is of course a replica. The actual telescope is much larger, but that telescope doesn't use any lenses. So because it doesn't use lenses, it is relatively cheaper to manufacture. This telescope is using a set of mirrors. One mirror in the inside, that mirror collects light and directs to the focus point over here, and there is another 45-degree flat mirror that reflects the image into the eyepiece located on top of the telescope. So this is actually a weird the looking position, because a lot of the time people think that the viewing location, the eyepiece, is on the bottom of the telescope, like on this one. So they point their telescope this way in the sky, but this is the wrong direction because the opening of the telescope is on the bottom. So this side needs to point up. So your telescope is actually standing just like that, and you look through the top of the telescope right over here. So for that reason, it may not be easy to point the telescope in the sky to the objects. So it may be a little frustrating. You'll get used to it when you own one. But this is just another way of telescope, and you can get actually better deal. Those are usually $500–600 category telescopes, and it goes up to maybe a couple $1,000s with the good ones. And the general rule for the telescopes are the larger the aperture or larger the diameter is, you pay more money to buy the telescope, because the cost of the optics go high significantly when you choose for bigger aperture. So this type of we call Newtonian, but there is also another name for this type of telescopes. They call it reflector. So this one is a refractor. It refracts the light because it uses lenses. This type of telescope is called reflector because it is reflecting light because it is using mirrors.
So I know that's a popular one, but what about this type of telescope?
Those are called Dobsonians. The difference is they are reflector telescopes for sure. There is nothing wrong with it, calling them reflector. But instead of on a tripod, they usually just form a lightweight tubing, and they set it on the floor. So certainly the cost of the manufacturing, and most of the people are making these kind of telescopes at their homes. They are cheaper, and they are cheaper to make. But because the one base of the telescope is sitting on the floor, and again, you are looking from the top of the telescope, and your tube is huge, and most of the time the tube is about 5–6 feet long. It is not easy to point that telescope to the objects in the sky. And also, this type of base cannot provide motor tracking. So if you are looking at the object in the sky, because it rotates, at one point your object will be leaving your field of view in the telescope. So you cannot provide tracking with that. I mean, cheap telescope to make, but always the price comes with some.
So would you recommend avoiding those types of telescopes for beginners, or
for beginners, yes. This is my most recommended telescope for beginners, and for when you have like your practice done and you are looking for something better, and then you can choose either you would like to go with a reflector or maybe a more like a advanced level amateur grade telescope, which is sitting on my left side over here, on your right side. So we talked about the telescope that uses lenses. We talked about telescope that uses mirrors. How about if telescope is using both lenses and reflectors to give you a better image? That type of telescopes are called Cassegrains. And Cassegrain telescopes, they can be very expensive, but those are great telescopes for doing stargazing or the amateur astronomy. And those are must if you are into astrophotography. So let me show you how it works. This is a Cassegrain telescope, so I will go on the other side. It is not difficult to point those type of telescopes in the sky. So here's a lock. So you just use up and down controls over here, and most of the time come with the electronics anyway, and you do left and right too. So you can see the lens over here, and inside there is a mirror that collects the light. There is a secondary mirror, and it's a complicated optical system. Light goes back and forth, and then finally it arrives to an eyepiece mounted right over here, and you look from behind the telescope. So, and they also have some accessories like this, for example. This is called finder scope. This allows you to point your object accurately to the object you are aiming to. Yes, Jim, I think you will say something.
Okay, I was just going to ask or point out, those of you at home who can't see what's going on in the studio right now, Levent was very agile in kind of riding the edge of the stage as he was telling you guys about what you were seeing. So it's unknown, but he deserves credit for not falling off the stage during the last few moments.
Thanks for the warning. I will pay more attention next time. Maybe I was lucky not to fall off the stage. I would just hug the telescope anyway if I did. So typically these type of telescopes are running from $1,500 and up. You can go to probably $20,000 depending on the aperture and the quality of optics. But those are the most stable constructions. And because of the stability, you can attach a big camera on the telescope, so the telescope will not lose its traction. Most of them come with computer control. Well, you don't need computer control for those type of telescopes, because you are going to point your telescope to an object and then take your picture or just look for the eye pleasure. But electronic controls help you sometimes finding the deep sky objects. Again, the telescopes are usually measured by their size. For example, this is an 8-inch telescope, and when I say 8-inch telescope, astronomers around the world understands that this aperture, this opening, is 8 inches wide. The telescopes are never measured by the length. It doesn't matter. There's a focal length. This is a different story, but all other parameters or all other dimensions of the telescopes are not significant. The significant part is the diameter of the telescope, or the opening of the telescope right here. And if you go up in size, the price goes up significantly. And for most deep sky objects, you need at least something like 6 inches. And 8 inches usually common star party telescope. It is light enough to carry it around. And if you go up like 11 inches, 12 inches, and 16 inches even, those are going to give you better view of the objects. But the problem is going to be the telescopes will get extremely heavy, and you won't be able to carry it around easily. You will need at least like 2 and maybe 3 person to lift your telescope up and sit it on the mount. We do have actually a 16-inch telescope at our observatory. Jim, if you can show its picture, just behind me, change the picture behind me. The 16-inch telescope is a great star party telescope.
There are
but
telescopes everywhere right now, by the way. It's very confusing looking.
most of the time, here is a 16-inch telescope. It's not easy to lift that telescope up from its place. We did it with Jim a couple of months ago, and it was an easy task. But here is the 16-inch telescope. It's good for this type of permanent mounts, so we don't have to carry it around anymore. But here is a great telescope.
Stays there for sure. I just want to really quickly go to some polls we had earlier. We asked you guys what you wanted to view in a telescope the most, and the answers for me were particularly interesting. So we had some of you saying you wanted to view nebula or clusters. These are deep sky objects. Others wanted to view stars, which is an interesting thing. I did include that in the poll as a small trap. So maybe that was rude of me. And then the rest of you chose moon and planet. So if you wanted to view a moon or planets, Levent, is there a particular telescope or instrument that is better to use, or maybe they should go with binoculars? I mean, do you have any input on that?
Well, binocular is always great for bright objects. For example, the moon, you can still see the craters of the moon with a pair of binoculars. And especially if you are looking at objects like, for example, the Pleiades, Seven Sisters or Seven Candles. Those are always giving great views. And planets, maybe, but if your intention is just the moon for the planets, I would go with a refracting telescope like this. Just spend a couple $100 and you can get a great view of the moon and planets. The reflecting telescopes are coming in larger sizes, and those are great for dimmer objects. If you are into maybe looking at Andromeda Galaxy and deep sky objects like Orion Nebula, for example, or Ring Nebula, probably your best bet is a reflecting telescope, and especially if you are taking photographs, a telescope like this is going to be. And by the way, speaking about astrophotography, this can be your only starting point. Buying that telescope is not letting you do all great astrophotography immediately. I would start with such a telescope, but for astrophotography, most important thing is going to be the mount of that telescope. Well, the mount of that telescope, the one it comes with it, is not going to be good enough for the taking great astronomical pictures. It will be okay, but not perfect. So for the perfect thing, you need a great or high quality tracking mount. And usually those type of mounts are as expensive as the telescopes itself.
So that brings up a really important point, Levent. People immediately want to buy a telescope so they can take photos of the night sky. But it's true, I don't know if you can confirm this, but just with a pretty standard low-level, beginner-level DSLR camera, if you take longer photo, you can get a lot of nebula pictures with that. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is going to do okay job. But when you go into the perfectionist, your needs are going to be different for the if you are going to take really dim nebulae pictures with that you need to use long exposure times, or take large series of photographs that you can combine it in the computer environment later, then you really need a good tracking tripod. We found this telescope in our inventory, by the way. This is a very good high quality telescope, and when it was released, that was over $500 telescope. And that is the last one in our gift shop inventory. We found it by coincidence that for some reason we didn't sell. I think it was not counted at one point. So we decided that we just give it for a good price, and the least price we were able to find online for this telescope is $240. So, and we decided to just release it for $200 plus shipping if you're interested. So you need to contact us if you're interested in buying that telescope. This is a very high quality refracting telescope, and probably I don't think any telescope on the market can beat that price and the telescope, the quality itself.
So in case you're interested in this, everybody, we do have plans to have it posted on the website. Our gift shop should be coming back online in the next week or so. So for whatever, if you want to get a t-shirt, you want to buy this telescope, you want to make a donation and support the planetarium, this should all be available online probably within the next week or so. There's some red tape we have to kind of cut through, but we're working on it, to say the least.
Okay, as my last word, if you're interested in buying a telescope and if you still have some questions, you can just send us the question at the planetarium's email address. And the next week, let's say you bought your telescope by next week, and still to start your amateur astronomy adventure, you need to be able to find out the interesting objects in the sky. So that's gonna be another part of a live stream. So next week we'll cover that part. And that part is using online resources and a free computer application or phone application to find the locations of the objects in the sky, so you can use your telescope to find them and point your telescope to those objects. So that's going to be covered next week. And in the meantime, if you are on the market for a telescope and if you have questions, send us an email. We'll go ahead and answer that.
All right. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week.